Did you know there's a city frozen in its final breath? A place where time stopped under a rain of fire and ash. In the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, just a few miles from the sparkling Bay of Naples, there once stood a city unlike any other, Pompeii. It was vibrant, wealthy, full of color and sound. Merchants shouted in the streets. Horses clattered over stone roads. Wine flowed, dice rolled. Gossip flew through villas and bathhouses. Then, one day in the year 79 CE, it all ended. In less than 24 hours, a city of over 10,000 people disappeared beneath a mountain of fire and ash. And for nearly 2 millennia, Pompeii lay forgotten, buried in silence, until its ghost began to rise again from the dust. Pompeii before the eruption. To understand the tragedy of Pompeii, we must first know the life that existed before the death. By the 1st century CE, Pompeii was a thriving Roman city. It sat at the crossroads of trade routes, nestled between the sea and the fertile volcanic soil that made the region rich in agriculture. The city boasted temples, theaters, bakeries, vineyards, and even fast food stalls, thermopolia, where citizens grabbed hot meals on the go. The streets were paved and bustling. The homes were luxurious and colorful, adorned with frescoes and mosaics. Running water flowed through a network of aqueducts and lead pipes, supplying fountains and private baths. Pompeii wasn't a backwater. It was alive. The people of Pompeii lived Roman lives structured by gods, politics, and pleasure. Inscriptions scratched into walls showed jokes, love notes, and political slogans. Some were simple graffiti. One reads, "I was here. I had a good time." Others were more ominous, death looms. But no one listened. Signs of doom. Mount Vesuvius towered silently above the city, lush and green, not the killer we now know it to be. Locals didn't see it as a volcano. To them, it was just a mountain. But in the days before the eruption, the earth began to whisper. There were tremors. Small earthquakes rattled the streets. Animals grew anxious. Wells dried. Some fled, most stayed. Earthquakes were unusual in the region. They were part of life, but this was different. A letter written decades later by Pliny the Younger describes what followed with chilling detail. He watched from across the bay as the mountain exploded, sending a plume of ash 30 kilometers into the sky. It looked, he said, like a pine tree with a trunk that branched into fire. What followed was not just an eruption, it was a catastrophe of apocalyptic proportions. The first hours. It began on the morning of August 24th, 79 CE. Just before noon, the top of Mount Vesuvius blew apart with a deafening roar. A mushroom cloud of volcanic rock, ash, and gas burst upward, casting the sky into darkness. Ash began to fall like snow, soft at first, then choking, smothering. Within hours, the city was blanketed. Roofs collapsed under the weight. People tried to flee, some with cloths wrapped around their mouths, others clutching their children or valuables. They thought it would pass. They hoped to wait it out. They were wrong. The eruption lasted more than 18 hours. And as night fell, the real horror began. A series of pyroclastic surges, fast-moving waves of superheated gas and debris raced down the volcano. Slopes at hundreds of kilometers per hour. These weren't just clouds. They were avalanches of death, reaching temperatures of up to 500 degrees Celsius. When the surge hit Pompeii, it was instant. Many victims were found in basements and storerooms, huddled in groups. Others were caught running, their final positions preserved by the ash that buried them. Their bodies decayed over centuries, leaving empty cavities in the hardened ash. In the 1800s, archaeologists began filling these cavities with plaster, creating the now famous cast: the dog writhing on its back, the child curled up, the man shielding his face. It's not just a ruin. It's a city of echoes, buried and forgotten. And then silence. Pompeii was gone. The eruption buried it under 6 meters of ash and pumice. Nearby Herculaneum was sealed in volcanic mud. Survivors who escaped rarely returned. The region was uninhabitable, cursed. Over time, the exact location of Pompeii was lost. Its name faded from memory. The land was repurposed. Vineyards were planted where once marble columns stood. For over 1,600 years, Pompeii slept. Rediscovery and the ghosts beneath the earth. For centuries, Pompeii remained a whisper beneath the soil. The land above it flourished. Grapevines grew. Farmers tilled fields that unknowingly rested on Roman villas. Stories persisted of a buried city near Mount Vesuvius, but they were treated as legend, a myth that had vanished with time. That began to change in the 18th century. In 1738, workers digging near the town of Resina stumbled upon marble ruins, not just stones, but entire structures. They had unknowingly unearthed Herculaneum, Pompeii's neighboring city, preserved in hardened volcanic mud. Then, in 1748, another crew, this time digging for a new palace for the King of Naples, hit something strange, just outside the town of Tor Annunziata. Walls, paintings, artifacts untouched by time. They have found Pompeii. The city comes alive again. The excavations revealed something no one expected, a city trapped in its final moments. Unlike typical ruins, Pompeii wasn't worn down by centuries of wind and war. It had been sealed, preserved. Frescoes still glowed with color. Bread was found carbonized in ovens, a loaf of bread, 2,000 years old, still intact. Jars of olives, tools, gold rings still clutched in the hands of skeletons. Dogs chained by the neck. Coins scattered on the floors of collapsed homes. Time hadn't passed here, it had simply paused. And the people? They were still there. In the 1800s, excavators began to notice hollow spaces within the hardened ash layers, strangely human-shaped. The Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Fogliarelli developed a technique. He poured plaster into the voids. What emerged were the most haunting artifacts of all, the Pompeii casts. Men, women, children preserved in their death poses. A mother shielding her child. A man curled up as though asleep, a slave shackled in place. Even a dog, contorted in agony, caught mid-suffocation. Pompeii wasn't just a sight. It was a frozen moment, a mass grave of history, a window into Roman life. Beyond the tragedy, archaeologists were stunned by how much Pompeii taught us about how Romans actually lived. Not emperors or generals, but everyday people. Graffiti lined the walls, thousands of messages scrawled by hand, like a social media feed from antiquity. Secundus was here. Beware of the dog. I hope your hemorrhoids burn. Vote for Lucius. He's honest. There were restaurants, taverns, and shops. Political posters were painted on houses. Amphorae of wine and garum filled storerooms. Pompeii was full of life, messy, funny, vulgar, joyful life. In brothels, paintings showed erotic scenes with surprising boldness. The Romans weren't shy. Rooms were labeled with carved symbols. Scholars later used the graffiti here to identify the names of workers, lovers, and clients. It's one of the oldest records of working-class lives and urban vice. Even the homes told stories. In the Villa of the Mysteries, a series of massive frescoes depicted what may be a secret Dionysian ritual hinting at cult practices that weren't a part of official Roman religion. These frescoes, massive, blood-red panels stretching across the walls, show robed women, musicians, dancers, and figures being whipped or crowned. One appears blindfolded. Another stares forward in trance. Some scholars believe the Villa of the Mysteries was a place of initiation into a Dionysian cult, tied to secrecy, altered states, and divine ecstasy. Others argue it could have simply been decorative, a wealthy family's embrace of the mystique, associated with the god of wine and chaos. But the ambiguity is part of its power. These paintings don't just show ritual, They hint at inner worlds, emotional states, and personal transformation. Even after 2,000 years, their meaning isn't fixed. They invite us to guess, to imagine, and they're not alone. Pompeii is filled with similar mysteries, fragments of lives we can see, but not always understand. In the quieter corners of the city, we find evidence of women and children, not rulers or warriors, but everyday citizens who made up the fabric of Roman society. Tidy sandals, dolls carved from bone and ivory, charms left in bedrooms. Inscriptions reveal names: Julia, Fortunata, Eutychia. Their roles were domestic, yes, but also economic, social, and religious. Some women owned businesses. Others ran inns or worked in family shops. They appear in records not as shadows, but as participants in public life, present in the temples, the forums, and the streets. Even the city's brothels, while often treated as mere curiosities, reveal complex relationships and hierarchies, with workers advertising their names, services, and sometimes even regular clients. As excavations continued, archaeologists were struck not just by what had been preserved, but by how emotionally human it all was. This wasn't the cold marble Rome of imperial glory. This was a city of sweat, laughter, hunger, flirtation, faith, fear, and all of it paused mid-motion. Pompeii blurred the line between ruin and reality. It was like stepping into a room someone had just left, only they never came back. The dead were not buried far away. They were underfoot all around. Their final poses, their belongings, their voices still waiting to be heard. Echoes through time, the rise of a buried city, the rediscovery of Pompeii didn't just change what we knew about ancient Rome. It changed how we thought about the past itself. Before Pompeii, archaeology was more treasure hunt than science, an act of looting in the name of prestige. Ruins were ransacked. Statues were stolen. History was seen as ornamental, not informative. But Pompeii couldn't be simplified. It wasn't a collection of broken columns or toppled temples. It was an entire city, intact, held in suspense. And with every new wall uncovered, every street revealed, it whispered a new truth about Rome, not the empire, but the people who lived within it. Archaeology reimagined. Giuseppe Fiorelli, the same man who pioneered the plaster casting method in the 1860s, also introduced another radical concept: excavating Pompeii by city block, documenting everything meticulously. Not just statues and treasures, but rooms, doors, graffiti, garbage. He created the first system for naming streets and houses, making Pompeii a living blueprint of ancient urban life. It was no longer enough to find what was beautiful. The focus shifted to what was true, and Pompeii offered endless truth. Where else could you walk into a bakery and still see the flour mills in place, the oven scorched black, the loaves of bread still round, still recognizable burned but whole? Where else could you find amphorae stacked like wine barrels, graffiti telling us who sold what, who owed whom, who loved who? The gaps between the stones. But for all the clarity Pompeii offered, it also raised questions that have never been fully answered. Why did so many stay? Some victims were clearly trying to escape. Their bones found on roads leading out of the city, mouths open, hands outstretched. But others remained inside, some asleep in their beds, others hiding in storerooms. Had they grown used to the tremors? Or were they simply unwilling to abandon their homes, their businesses, their gods? And then there's the matter of warning. Pliny the Elder, a Roman naturalist and naval commander, rushed toward the eruption from across the bay, hoping to study the phenomenon and rescue friends. He died in the chaos, overcome by gas and ash. But his nephew, Pliny the Younger, survived and wrote 2 detailed letters to the historian Tacitus describing the event. These letters are still our most direct account of what happened. But they don't mention everything. How many died in Herculaneum? and other villages now lost to history. Pompeii is famous not just for what it shows, but for what it withholds: spectacle and strangeness. By the 1800s and into the 20th century, Pompeii became more than an archaeological site. It became a cultural obsession. Writers, painters, and poets flocked to the ruins. Romantic thinkers saw Pompeii not as a tomb, but as a snapshot of human fragility. Goethe visited in 1787 and was stunned. Mark Twain wrote about it with awe. Sigmund Freud kept a small statue of a Pompeian woman in his study, calling it a symbol of the unconscious something buried, yet preserved. Tourism followed. Wealthy Europeans toured the site in carriages. Ruins became backdrops for fantasy. Artworks were removed and displayed in museums. Frescoes, especially the erotic ones, were hidden in what was known as the secret cabinet at the Naples Archaeological Museum, a collection of sexual art deemed too scandalous for polite society. Pompeii became a contradiction, part museum, part curiosity, part mirror to our own uncomfortable fascinations. Myths born in ash. Inevitably, myths began to form around Pompeii: half-truths, dramatizations, and spiritual interpretations. Some Christian thinkers in the 19th century viewed the eruption as a divine punishment, likening it to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. After all, hadn't they found brothels and graffiti in excess? Wasn't this evidence of Rome's decadence meeting righteous fire? Of course, Pompeii was no more or less sinful than any Roman city. But the images left behind, men embracing, lovers entwined, families caught in prayer, gave the tragedy a biblical tone that was hard to shake. Others saw it as a memento mori, a warning from the past. "Remember you will die," whispered the ash-coated streets. Pompeii was death, but it was also life, caught in impossible stillness. The House of the Faun and other marvels. Among Pompeii's most remarkable structures is the House of the Faun, named after a small bronze statue of a dancing faun found in its garden. It was one of the largest homes in the city, nearly 30,000 square feet, and spoke to immense wealth. Inside, archaeologists discovered the Alexander mosaic, a breathtaking floor mosaic showing the Battle of Issus between Alexander the Great and Darius III. It was made of over 1.5 million tiny tiles and had survived nearly perfectly. Elsewhere, temples to Apollo and Venus rose beside the marketplace. But even in these grand spaces, the human touch was never far. Etched into the gladiator barracks were notes. Celadus the Thracian, 3 victories, adored by the girls. A city of the living, a tomb of the dead. There's something haunting about the way Pompeii keeps returning to us, not just in books or films, but in real shifting discoveries. Even now, new areas are being excavated. In 2020, archaeologists uncovered an almost perfectly preserved thermopolium, complete with painted panels showing ducks, chickens, and amphorae. Traces of ancient food were found in the containers. One pot held remnants of a garlicky fish stew. More recently, in 2023, 2 new victims were discovered in the ruins of what appeared to be a bakery. One had a crushed skull from falling debris. The other, curled near a doorframe, seemed to be trying to escape. It's never over. The city continues to speak. The mind of the past. Pompeii offers a rare gift, the mundane and the miraculous, side by side. It tells us that ancient people weren't just statues or myths. They lived noisy, complicated, ordinary lives. They gossiped, prayed, made love, baked bread, painted walls, and argued about politics. They made jokes. They mourned their dead. They dreamed of the future. And when disaster struck, they did what we all might do. They ran, they hid, they hoped. Pompeii doesn't glorify the past. It humanizes it. And in doing so, it haunts us because it shows that no matter how advanced or proud a civilization may be, nature will always have the final word. Science, skeletons, and the legacy of a lost city. Pompeii is frozen in time, but time hasn't stopped moving around it. Every decade, science gives us new tools to peer deeper into the ash. What was once a ghost city is now a living laboratory, a place where biology, chemistry, history, and technology collide. And the more we examine it, the more it tells us about not just how people died, but how they lived, what they ate, how they moved, what they feared, and what they dreamed of. The bones speak for generations. The victims of Pompeii were mostly treated as objects, static figures trapped in their death throes, cast in plaster and photographed for books and postcards. But that began to change in the 21st century. Archaeologists began reanalyzing the human remains not just as casts, but as biological evidence. CT scans, DNA testing, isotopic analysis, all of it breathed new life into long-dead bones. A 35-year-old man and a teenage boy, discovered in 2020, were scanned and analyzed down to their dental enamel and bone protein structure. They weren't related. One had compressed vertebrae, perhaps a life of physical labor. The other had traces of a regional diet heavy in legumes and grains. Science doesn't just tell us how these people died, it shows us who they were. DNA from ash. In 2022, for the first time ever, scientists extracted and sequenced complete human genomes from Pompeii. The results were stunning. One victim had DNA markers linking him not to the Italian peninsula, but to the Caucasus region, possibly modern-day Georgia or Armenia. It revealed the incredible diversity of Roman life in the first century: migrants, traders, slaves, and citizens, all woven together in a cosmopolitan web. Pompeii, it turns out, wasn't just Roman. It was global, even back then. Lives interrupted. We often think of ancient cities in terms of monuments, columns and forums, gods and emperors. But Pompeii forces us to think smaller, more intimately. In 2021, archaeologists discovered the remains of a modest home, not grand like the Villa of the Mysteries or House of the Faun, but simple, humble. Inside, they found a 3-legged table, amphorae still resting in their corners, and a wooden bed frame reduced to charcoal. Under the bed, the remains of a small child. There was no luxury here, no art, no mosaic floor. Just the ordinary life of working-class Romans, whose stories are rarely preserved in stone. Pompeii offers them back to us. New deaths in an old city. But there's a strange irony to Pompeii's resurrection. Though the city has been dead for 2,000 years, it hasn't stopped claiming lives. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, dozens of workers died during excavations killed by collapsed tunnels, toxic gas pockets, or falling walls. Some were buried in the very ash they were digging through. Even now, preservation work can be dangerous. In 2010, a 3-meter wall near the House of the Gladiators collapsed without warning, reigniting debates about how fragile the city is and how much longer it might survive. Pompeii is a paradox, preserved by disaster but slowly being unmade by time, tourism, and exposure. Pompeii and the modern world. In art and culture, Pompeii is everywhere. It appears in paintings by Turner and Alma Tadema. It haunts the pages of Bulwer Lytton's The Last Days of Pompeii, Victorian novel that helped shape the modern image of the eruption as a fiery apocalypse. That novel inspired operas, silent films, even early disaster movies. In 2014, Hollywood resurrected Pompeii again with fireballs, gladiator duels, and slow-motion tragedy. But beyond the spectacle, Pompeii has become a symbol of fragility, of time, of sudden endings. It reminds us that civilization, no matter how advanced, can vanish in hours. That lives, no matter how ordinary, can echo across centuries. And it's not just about disaster, it's about memory, about what we choose to remember, and what lies waiting to be found. Pompeii as a mirror. There's something deeply unsettling about seeing so much of ourselves in this ancient city. Pompeii had fast food joints and political advertising. It had gossip, social climbing, vulgar graffiti, lovers' quarrels, and dinner parties. There were gyms, bathhouses, and cults of celebrity around gladiators. We want to believe that history is distant, that we've changed. But Pompeii says otherwise. The people buried here were like us so much so that walking its streets can feel like a time loop. Like a reflection in broken glass. They lived, they laughed, they worried. They planned for a tomorrow that never came. Pompeii's ongoing conversation, the story of Pompeii, isn't over not by a long shot. New excavations are happening right now in areas never touched before. New rooms are being uncovered. New theories are being proposed. Did the eruption happen on August 24th, as traditionally believed? Or was it actually October, as some carbonized food inscriptions now suggest? Was the final surge of destruction faster than we thought? Did some people survive and return, only to die weeks later? Even the idea of who Pompeii belonged to has changed. For centuries, it was a playground for European elites. Now, it's a symbol of shared heritage, a testament to the lives of immigrants, tradespeople, women, and the enslaved. Pompeii keeps evolving, it keeps talking, and we keep listening. A threshold, not a tomb. When you walk through Pompeii today, past the worn stones of the Via dell'Abbondanza, past doorways and columns and painted gods, you feel something strange in your chest. It's not just awe, it's not just sadness, it's a sense of continuity. That life doesn't end with death. That stories don't disappear with the storyteller. That time folds in on itself layer by layer, ash by ash. Pompeii isn't just a tragedy. It's a message in stone. Nothing is ever truly gone. Not if we remember. Not if we look. Ashes and echoes, the city that speaks. There's a silence in Pompeii that words can't quite touch. It isn't the silence of a ruin. It's the silence of a place where life was interrupted. It's as if the city is still holding its breath. No matter how many tourists walk its streets, no matter how many guides explain the mosaics or the plaster casts, there's always that strange feeling that just behind the next doorway, someone is still waiting, someone who never left. Pompeii doesn't just haunt us because of how it died. It haunts us because of how familiar it all still feels. Disaster without warning, perhaps that's what gives Pompeii such power. It wasn't destroyed by war or famine or conquest. There was no warning, no buildup, no grand historical event. It was just a day like any other. The sun rose, shops opened. Bread was baked, people laughed, they worked, they made plans. And then everything changed. That's the part that lingers. The idea that disaster can come not as thunder, but as a shadow in the sky. That even the strongest walls, the most civilized lives, can fall to ash in an afternoon. Pompeii is a reminder that we live on borrowed time. That no empire, no architecture, no wealth can shield us when the earth decides to speak. A compass for memory. In many ways, Pompeii has become a compass for our historical imagination. It's more than a city, it's a metaphor for fragility, for beauty and decay, for memory held against forgetting. Every detail that survived, the shoes, the jewelry, the cups left on tables, is a thread pulled across time. Pompeii forces us to confront what we usually try to avoid, that history is not abstract. It's not made of kings and treaties. It's made of people and the moments they never got to finish. A mirror, not a monument. Look closely at Pompeii, and you'll see more than just artifacts. You'll see a child's toy, a jar of makeup, a wall painting of a dog wagging its tail. You'll see yourself. The greatest shock of Pompeii is not its tragedy, it's its closeness. The realization that these were people just like us. They were not mythical. They were not ancient in the way we imagine. They had worries, gossip, meals, debts, dreams. And they were taken not because of some great fault, but because life is fragile. Pompeii reminds us of what truly matters and how quickly it can be lost. The city that taught the world. Pompeii's influence has rippled far beyond Italy. It helped shape the modern field of archaeology. It challenged Victorian morality. It changed how we depict antiquity in film, literature, and museum halls. It inspired everything from Gothic horror to historical fiction to modern disaster films. But its real legacy is deeper. It taught us that history isn't just grand. It's intimate. It's in the scraps, the details, the breath before the end. It taught us to look for stories in the shadows, to listen to stone, still unfolding, and Pompeii hasn't finished revealing itself. Less than 2/3 of the city has been fully excavated. Many buildings remain untouched, still buried under ash and overgrown by earth. Who knows what lies beneath? New technologies, ground-penetrating radar, 3D reconstruction, and advanced scanning are opening up new ways of seeing beneath the surface without destroying what remains. We may soon discover more names, more lives, more pieces of this unfinished puzzle. But for every answer Pompeii gives, it also offers a question. Who are these people? What would they say if they could speak? And when it happens again, because it always does, will we be remembered so well? The human ashes of time, standing in Pompeii today, as the sun falls across the red-tiled roofs and the stone streets glow golden, it's hard not to feel something sacred, not religious, not mystical, but human. You look at the casts of those who died and you realize they weren't waiting for death. They were trying to live until the very last second. And in that struggle, in that moment of reaching, of sheltering, of fleeing something eternal was captured. Not just their bodies, but their presence. Pompeii became their grave, yes, but also their monument. Their story told not through marble, but through dust. A final whisper. In the end, Pompeii doesn't shout. It doesn't roar like the volcano that destroyed it. It whispers. It asks us to remember the forgotten, to see history not as distant, but as delicate, to carry the past with us, not in textbooks, but in awareness. Awareness that time is fragile, that life is fleeting. That meaning doesn't lie in the grand, but in the ordinary moments that define who we are, moments like bread in an oven. Laughter at a dinner, a child's sandal beneath a bed. Pompeii gives those moments back to us, and in doing so, it becomes more than a city. It becomes a mirror.